click record, and I will pass on to Finlay for the presentation part. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you, Clara. Can everybody see my screen? Just one screen. That's good. Perfect. So I've been in the Climate Justice Caucus for a while. I'm in Unite the Union as well. I'm in the Aerospace and Shipbuilding branch, Bristol one. And I also, so I'm an aviation worker. I'm an aerospace engineer. I've been designing aircraft engines. That's my background. And I'm in this group called Safe Landing. So just kind of for context of me, I run this group, and part of what we're doing is we're trying to discuss aviation decarbonisation inside the industry. We're a group for aviation workers, and it's quite a difficult industry to tackle because it's high carbon, it's very reliant on fossil fuels. And this idea of workers' assemblies is a way that partly from our group trying to have this conversation with different unions, and it being such a difficult issue, we thought, you know what, we maybe need to change the way we approach this problem. So that's kind of the context of me. And we have been advocating for this idea. If you go on our website and you go to the assembly section, you can see a video that we made to try and convince people this was a good idea. And it did secure us some funding, and we've gone out, we've done some stuff with that funding this year, which I'll talk about at the end. There's also a blog post on our website, and you can click on that and you can have a read specifically about workers' assemblies, and we're laying out some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about tonight. So just at a high level, the reason why we think we need to do this is because there's some systemic issues in industry and in policy, in terms of government policy, that are kind of real hurdles to us taking more rapid action on the climate. So the first thing is that corporate leaders, business leaders, and also political leaders avoid topics they see as risky, and climate is something that a lot of politicians really don't want to be, want to stay away from as much as they can, and not get into it. Time horizons is a really big problem. So many leaders, either in the political world or in the corporate world, are only in their position for a few years. At most, if they are a long time, it's 5 to 10 years. So the system incentivizes them to prioritize short-term quick wins. What can I do in the next year that's going to save costs and get me to win the election? But if something's going to benefit us, but it requires upfront cost, and we'll see the benefits in 10 years, they don't want to do this. So we really need to be mindful of this as the situation, both for political leaders and for business leaders as well. And then when we do elect leaders, and this is true of when we elect political leaders or like trade union reps, we do so in a way that's quite difficult for the people that we actually elect to know why we elected them, like on which parts of their manifesto were we particularly enthusiastic about, maybe other parts we were less, but we don't know that. They just know that we voted for them with this binary vote. So it doesn't make it clear where we stand on particular issues and policies. We might be really keen on a particular trade union leader's stance on strike action, but less clear on their and supportive of their decarbonisation plans. So yeah, and often issues like action on climate are complex, and the people that vote for, well, all of us that vote for our leaders don't necessarily have all of the information to allow us to make informed decisions about this. So even if they could tell what we were thinking, often people aren't well educated about these things. Climate is a rapidly evolving topic, and it's quite complicated, and we're not taught about it in school. So there's also a really important aspect to this, which is informing citizens and informing workers about the current state of our industries, and how those need to change and why. So yeah, just to kind of emphasize this with a diagram, political leader cares about quarterly profits this year. They want the company to be projecting short-term growth, and they will probably take their leaving bonus in the next 5 years and be out the door. However, the climate crisis is going to really be serious probably in about 10 years' time. Obviously, I can't be precise with that, but in our kind of 10, 15, 20-year time horizon, this is when it's going to be particularly bad. And they'll have been long since gone. And if they've set up our economy, if they've set up our company or industrial sector to be poorly prepared for that, they don't care because they're gone by that point. Whereas workers citizens will be living through that, and workers, like I'm 33 years old, I want a career for 30, 40 years. So it really matters to me what happens in the 2030s, while it doesn't for a business leader. So one way of getting around this in the political sphere is this idea of citizens' assemblies, about kind of maybe we need to do politics differently, because currently political leaders aren't making the difficult decisions that we know they need to make and that the climate science requires. So there's been a number of citizens' assemblies that we can look at. As an example, if you want to learn about this, you can look into the Climate Assembly in the UK. There's been citizens' assemblies in Scotland and Ireland and in France and lots of other places as well. So what do? So basically a citizens' assembly, it's a group of people that are brought together. They learn about or discuss an issue or a bunch of issues, and they reach conclusions about what they think should happen. So it's quite important how the participants are selected. Now, they're selected to represent and reflect the wider population. So they're like a mini citizenship, or if we were doing a workers' assembly, a mini representative group of workers. So when people apply to take part, we understand their demographics, their age, gender, ethnicity, social class, and also their attitudes. If we were doing a citizens' assembly on climate, you'd want to understand what's their views on climate, and you get a representative reflection of the citizenship when you do a survey of the wider population. So if there's a 50-50 gender split, you'd have that representation in the assembly members. If it was 50 people or 100 people, it would be broken down in that way. Now that's called the sortition system, and that's a specific practice and a way of doing things to ensure that the views of that mini assembly is representative of the wider views and demographics. Now, they also then give members the time and the opportunity to learn about and discuss a topic. So often citizens' assemblies take place over a few days or even a few weeks. Participants come in and they hear from specialists in the topics that are being discussed. They also get a chance to ask them questions and hear back from them, and then they can develop a much more informed, in-depth understanding of those topics. So yeah, they usually last for 2 or more weekends, have 40 or more participants, and really important, it's facilitated by independent facilitators. They make sure everybody's voice is heard, and ensure that you have a really well-structured and well-mannered discussion and collaboration towards a set of recommendations, rather than a toxic debate. As obviously we all know that if you're talking about the climate, it's very easy to get into a debate that's emotional and heated rather than kind of calm and reasonable. And that. So if you want to learn more about citizens' assemblies, there's a link that I put in the pack as well. Now, there are some issues with citizens' assemblies because they're great and we've run them already, and they produced recommendations that you'd expect from citizens trying to say to government, you need to implement these policies. We need to fly less and drive less. We need to change our consumption habits. We need to reduce our meat consumption. Now, the problem with that is most of those recommendations have been ignored by the government. And a central argument to this is that that's going to be really damaging to the economy and to employment. And there's this jobs narrative. And it's very easy for people to then put the environmental policies against workers and create this, I think, artificial divide between what's good for the environment and what's best for the economy and workers. It has to be that rapid climate action is good for the economy over the long term. So yeah, there's this divide. So, and that's reasonable. It's to be expected. If farmers that breed cattle are told we need to eat less beef, they will see that as a threat on their lifestyle and their way of doing things, and their view of themselves. And it's really important. So yeah, that we don't kind of let that just develop into a thing where all farmers are then an enemy against reforming the agricultural system. So they also recommendations haven't made their way through into environmental groups. And I think partly that's because often the detail's kind of complex and it doesn't affect the average person. Like what sort of steel manufacturing we go to doesn't affect the average person and kind of get them out of bed in the morning. Whereas it does really affect someone that works in the steel industry. and they're more likely to take forward the recommendations and push their industry to change it. So Workers Assemblies is kind of our antidote to that in a way. So why do we need to do them? Well, a major threat to job security isn't rapid climate action, it's climate breakdown leading to big economic crashes and changes to our industry that happen overnight without planning and in a chaotic way. And workers in fossil fuel sectors, high carbon sectors like aviation, where I work, are most at risk from an unplanned transition like this, where we've just ignored things. We've already ignored things for 20 years. We ignore them for another 10, 15 years, and then we get disaster. But if those workers are given a voice, they can be agents of change rather than blockers, to push for these policies and say, actually, we'd rather see our industry change by early design rather than late disaster. Well, we can be part of that and we can be pushing for it, and we can ensure that that transition is in our best interests rather than happens over the course of a few months and we all get laid off. So workers are directly affected, they understand their industry, and they can also go a lot deeper than just random citizens can into a particular aspect of how to decarbonize their industry. They also have the ability, obviously, to take direct industrial action and be a different vehicle from change compared to civil society and how they might try and push and pressure politicians. So just kind of making this sort of specific to trade unions as well. At the moment, we think there's a big problem where if you look at how each sector says it's going to decarbonize, that strategy is designed by business leaders, the people I was showing you at the start, that don't have that long-term view. So currently we lack independent worker-led visions of the future for our industries. And currently trade union policies often just support these sustainability roadmaps that were produced by business leaders and don't critique them in depth as much as we should and challenge them. So, as I say, I've kind of said this already, but business leaders think with this long-term view, whereas we are thinking in timescales of 40-year career. But if you think about it, when it comes to pay, terms and conditions, sick pay, holidays, we don't take the positions of our leaders at face value. If they want to change something, we interrogate it and we check if they're trying to screw us over. It's our job to critically evaluate what they say and fight the corner of workers. And this applies to sustainability plans as much as it does to changes in contracts and pay. Now, I just want to kind of make this specific to something we did. So we as a Unite Grassroots Climate Caucus went to the policy conference of Unite this summer. Clara, amongst others, stood up and gave a really powerful message about the need for no new fossil fuels. We got into a discussion, into a bit of a debate with the Executive Council and also some other people that stood up and spoke from refineries and the oil and gas sector. And there was a number of straw man arguments used, which they were making they were kind of claiming that we were making arguments which we weren't. They were sort of saying we are pushing for fossil fuels to be turned off overnight. In fact, we were just saying no new oil and gas fields that will open in 10, 15 years' time. So one thing is the debate wasn't really proper. We were kind of talking at cross purposes. The next thing is that one of the main things the Executive Council said, and this is a Scottish guy in charge of the energy sector in Scotland, so the North Sea workers, they said, well, we understand more than anyone else that our sector needs to change. We know climate change is a thing. We know our sector needs to decarbonize, but we work in the sector. We understand it the best. We don't need people from the outside telling us what needs to happen. Rather than having something forced on us and we think we're going to get screwed over, we think there should be worker-led plans. So it's kind of exactly one of the reasons that they're kind of blocking what we think is a progressive, necessary policy on no new fossil fuels. And they're saying, well, instead, we need a worker-led plan, but there isn't one. Like the union doesn't have a clear strategy on how the steel industry needs to decarbonize, how the energy sector does, how the aviation industry does, how construction, how road transport, etc. There isn't an alternative worker-led strategy for each of these sectors, and that's what I think we need. So just to kind of cover as well a few other issues specific to trade unions. So personally, I've been trying to do this. I've been trying to get climate policies through my union, not as big as No New Fossil Fuels, like a lot more simple, and it's really difficult. I think I find, and I think a lot of other people find, that existing union structures, branch meetings, conferences, bringing along a motion, debating it, is often quite difficult to discuss climate issues, particularly in a high carbon sector. The debate is often way more nuanced than just a simple yes/no vote. The problems are complex and they're really difficult to fit into a one-page motion. You have to write a single page of A4 and then you've got 5 minutes to discuss it, or 10 minutes. It's really difficult to get into some of the specifics on some of these issues, even if it's relatively simple, let alone thinking about an entire industry strategy. And because the solutions are complex too, and often require political choices, a balance of something, we're going to do more here and less here, etc. And it's just not easy to do in a branch meeting or a conference meeting. Now, decarbonisation could also be a sensitive subject. Any transition of any kind can sound risky to workers because it's change and it's potential to get screwed over. So it's understandable that this is a difficult conversation. It's very easy to get into an emotional and heated debate rather than remaining calm, having an informed discussion and keeping it evidence-based rather than getting into they said, he said, I think. And so this is what we're kind of proposing here, is how can we get around this topic that I'm sure if some of you have taken climate-related motions to different branches and conferences, sometimes they might be okay if you've got a receptive audience. If you've got 1 or 2 people in the room, it can be quite difficult. And it's about how can we improve what we're doing to find a way to help with this. So yeah, workers' assemblies, they give workers the time, the space, and expert information to allow us to deliberate with peers and produce informed policy recommendations. We can draw on the viewpoints of a wide range of workers. It's not just about 1 or 2 reps that are the research officer for their sector, basically making all of the decisions. Members would be put at the heart of decision making. We'd be innovatively building on existing strong union democratic processes. This is not about trying to circumvent it, it's about trying to improve it and supercharge it. It would raise the profile of worker democratic engagement and trade unionism, and probably help to kind of excite and involve younger climate concerned workers that sometimes feel like trade unionism is less relevant to them. So just really quickly, as I say, there's a period of learning, deliberation, and then decision making where you produce recommendations. And into that process, you have the participants that are selected with sortition to make them representative of like the workers in that sector. And then the output of that are a series of recommendations. So these do not immediately become union policy. What those recommendations would do is they'd feed into existing union democratic processes. So they become motions, and then reps that are voted in have then review those, and they either accept them or they reject them. But the thing that they agree to is to review them. If they reject them, to provide reasons why they've done so. So they still have the power, and they still are voted in to decide on stuff. But this is about providing them with really well-informed, well-thought-out policy motions and suggestions that can help inform strategy and position and give them a good understanding about what the wider pool of workers are thinking. Just in terms of next steps on this, I just wanted to cover, we are talking to various Unite NISCs, so these are national industrial sector conferences. We're talking to people in automotive, aerospace, aviation, chemicals, and the energy sector about going to their national conferences to discuss this. We did take this to the Unite Policy Conference, and the Executive Council also asked us to remit this motion on the promise that we could go and present it to them because they didn't properly understand it. So we're trying to push for that still, but it's being a bit slow. And then I also just wanted to let you know, we're actually trying, with some of the funding we've got, we're trying to do this kind of 3-hour workshop to demonstrate some of the principles here. And we're doing that in Bristol just in a couple of weeks. So that's quite exciting as well, and can provide us with something tangible to show people in the union of like why this is quite an interesting and exciting process. So just ways to get involved. Actually, we could cover this at the end, couldn't we, Clara? So I could stop now and ask about questions, and then we can do the how to get involved at the end. I probably talked for long enough, so I'll stop there.
Brilliant. Thank you, Finlay. And I have to say, this presentation gets better and better and clearer with time. So clearly getting feedbacks and acting on them. That's great. So yeah, we're going to take now a moment to take some questions. If there are like things that are unclear or that you would like to ask. If you can use your electronic hand, that's great. You can also put the question in the chat if you prefer do so. Or if you don't know how to do either of them, you'll have to wave on your camera. Just give a moment for people to think. While people are thinking, I'm just going to ask a question then. You mentioned you doing some sort of mini trial in the aerospace sector. So it's not like a full workers assembly. And I'm interested to hear that, if we can't get the full thing straight away, there may be like first step and alternative. So can you just explain a little bit more what this sort of mini format?
Well, we kind of had this, basically, I mean, the history on it is we had this idea for the last couple of years, this would be a good thing. And I pushed for some climate funding for the Worker Assembly idea and got it to specifically do an aviation one, and a bit of funding for that. And then we've got members that are in Unite the Union, and also BALPA, British Airline Pilots. We had BALPA agree to scope one of these, but they didn't want to use our funding. They wanted to do it themselves. And now they're kind of dragging their feet and aren't really pushing it to get it done. Unite, we took it to the policy conference. It got remitted. We've struggled to get an audience to do it. It's approaching the end of the year. So I thought, let's use some of that funding to just do something properly. But it is just going to be a mini thing. So it'll be 3 hours. But yeah, there's an invite that's to any aviation workers in Bristol. They fill in demographic information when they register to take part. They get £50 for taking part for their time, and to encourage people to come along after work. And then it's being run independently. There's an independent advisory group that decided the format for the workshop, the calling question that participants are going to go through, and they also pick the speakers. So there'll be basically an hour of discussion about the challenges and opportunities in aviation over the next 15 years. That'll be free form for the workers at the tables doing it. We'll then hear from 2 speakers, one in the industry, one from Airbus, one from outside the industry, Committee on Climate Change. And then people can ask them questions. And then they've got an hour at the end of then more deliberation, discussing what they've heard, seeing if they've changed their opinions, and then recording. If they were to do a bigger process like that, what would they like to hear? What more information do they need? What extra speakers would they like to have? What are their outstanding challenges still, and that sort of thing. And that's all then going to be put together into a report and a video made of it as well. Yeah, happy to answer more questions about that. I can share the link to it as well in the chat.
Thank you. Is there any other questions? James. And if you introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Yeah, thank you. My name is James. I've put it in the chat, but I work for the International Transport Workers Federation. So we're Unite members because that's our staff union, as well as being a big ITF affiliate in the transport sectors. Yeah, thanks, Philly. I think I was somewhat familiar with this concept, but that was a great presentation, and so I think there's a lot of promise here. I just had one sort of question and observation, and I'm sure there's an answer to this, but I think the sortition method for ensuring that the participants are actually representative on gender lines, ethnicity lines, and so on is really important. And I think that's probably a way of getting a group of workers together or citizens together who are more representative in some of our committees as well, which is important too. I suppose particularly when we're talking about climate issues, one group that potentially wouldn't capture are the future workers in the given industry. And I'm wondering how that gets incorporated, because obviously it's really important that any of these measures, any of these pathways are taking account of or based on the experiences of workers in the industry today. But it's also going to have major impacts on people who would have gone into those jobs in 10, 20, 30 years time as well, particularly where you've got very geographically focused industries, and we've had the same sorts of jobs in the same sort of place for generations and generations. And I don't know really what the solution to that is, other than perhaps do you incorporate like students and school kids into this as well, to give kind of some forward-leaning perspective? I don't know.
So, I mean, basically the answer to this is when you put together the advisory group to start planning the assembly, you have part of that is deciding the scope, and there's a whole there's the scope of the question and the scope of the participants. Are you considering the decarbonisation of the whole industry, or are you going to focus on one small part? Are you going to focus on one of the impacts and ignore the others? So there's basically so many different ways that you can scope the assembly, and it's all just comes down to decision of what you're trying to achieve. Participants is the same. So like you said, you might have that group at the start, the advisory group that puts it together and says, you know what, because we're talking about stuff in 15, 20, 30 years time, it's really important to get the voice of the younger generation. And we're going to do that. I mean, just for the workshop, we had it open to aviation students at university or college are eligible to apply, and we're going to have a few of them in there as well for that exact reason. But it's basically a choice of people that are organising the assembly to decide based on what sort of perspectives and voices they want in there to get a good well-rounded set of recommendations.
Thanks, Finlay. And obviously here we're also thinking inside our own union, how we progress those discussions inside the union. Okay, we've got a few more questions. There's one in the chat, so if you want to start with this one, and then I will take Jill and Ian together before you come back. But I think it was a question by Raki. Do you differentiate between impact of climate change, global warming on workers in their workplace, and in their communities, adaptation issue, and impact of policies and technology introduced in the name of addressing climate change mitigation? Do you want to answer this one quickly, and then we'll take Jill and Ian?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is you can do both. For aviation and lots of other sectors, climate will directly impact the sector. We'll see more flooding in airports. We'll see more wildfires. We'll see increased turbulence, all sorts of things. And obviously, one of the ways to, I think, if you look at those climate impacts and you look at the way to mitigate them, it's reducing fossil fuels. And then you say, okay, well, how do we reduce fossil fuels in our sector? And then you do an assembly on that as well. So you can kind of do, you can basically do it on any topic. It's worth doing it on a topic that isn't easy to decide the answer for. I suppose because these one thing about these is they take time, and then obviously because of that they take money as well. So you do it on something where there is a bit of a deadlock and there's an uncertainty about something, and where it's worth doing. But yeah, technically you could do it on anything. So you could do it on the climate impacts to that, and how the union should take a position on increased temperatures in the workplace. It might be that you think, well, actually we can decide that as a union without needing to do a big assembly process. Or it might be actually we think we can't, we want to involve more people and we need much more expert evidence. So it really is a matter of deciding if it's a big enough and difficult and contentious enough issue to need to do an assembly on.
Thank you. I'm going to take Jill and Ian's question, and then Raki, you making some really interesting point in the chat, so maybe you can share it with the group because we're recording. But I'll bring Jill and then Ian, and then Finlay, you can come back.
Yeah, the answer to this might be no, because we are definitely trying out here. But given the difficulty we're having engaging the EC, would it be useful or not to write to the chair of the EC saying, you know, we are carrying this out in Bristol to do with aviation. You would be welcome, and or the various sectors, to come and see it in action. I mean, they may well say no, but it would certainly signal to them that we're not just waiting for them to come back to us, and at the same time ask them what's happened to the United Environmental Task Force, which, you know, would be a good way to channel this through. So as I say, I appreciate it is a pilot one, test pilot one. So
Yeah.
It's a pilot one, potentially involving pilots as well.
And Jill is from the local authority sector. So I'm going to bring Ian next. And if you can tell us your sector, because I know you are in a geographical branch.
Yeah, well, can you hear me okay? I'm coming through. Okay, well, I see myself as being in the voluntary sector come education, as a sort of semi-detached academic that used to teach this sort of stuff, and with an interest in the Lucas workers. And this feels, you know, right up that street. And I'll let them know. I'll email them tomorrow that there's fabulous developments going on, because they're talking about resigning from Unite on the basis of the position in Gaza. So, you know, we live in interesting times. Now, I've found it really difficult to start the debate in my area branch, when we're a kind of mixed bag of all sorts of people. And I've got a feeling that people are actually quite scared. They're kind of shy about not knowing that everybody has to be an expert these days. And actually, what they really need is a space where they can unload all the concerns that they've got. But what tends to happen is people get really defensive, and you end up with crazy arguments about lithium. So it all got to be, the last time we tried to talk about cars and batteries, we all ended up in this technical discussion that nobody actually knew anything about, you know, sort of arguing about. So we need to open a debate that says it's okay not to know, but what we do share is all this uncertainty. So there's uncertainty about jobs, there's uncertainty about the future. And the other point I want to make is that the Secretary General of the United Nations on the 6th of September put forward a press release that said that the climate breakdown has begun. So it's not 10 years' time, it's today. And if you've been in Nottingham today and experienced the rains and stuff, then you start to see that the climate has changed. You know, it's broken down. So we don't know where we're going. Nobody knows. And I think that's actually quite a powerful position. If Unite can be a space where you can have those conversations and start to develop constructive responses, then the union it's a union, a safe space for sort of dealing with that sort of stuff. So I think hats off to Finlay. I think he's doing a great job. But anyway, just some thoughts. Oh, the other thing was that I put that motion forward on Worker Assemblies, and I was asked to leave the branch. So it wasn't seen to be ever so constructive. So I've got a bit of a job to do to try and sort of get by that.
Thanks, Ian. And I'm just going to bring back Finlay if you want to comment or respond to some of the points.
Yeah,
here.
I mean, so Joe was first, wasn't it? So that was just the suggestion. I mean, yeah, for context, after we remitted the motion, had the motion remitted by the Executive Council, when I followed up with the chair of the Executive Council and said, can we get an opportunity to present this? They said remitted motions are discussed in early 2024, so come back to me in January, February or something. So yeah, but I have not emailed them to inform them about this workshop taking place. So it's good suggestion, and I will literally start drafting that straight after this to let them know. So good suggestion. And then in terms of what Ian said, I'm just thinking about specific points to respond to. I think you made a lot of good points, basically, that I'd agree with. And I just want to say, yeah, the 10-15 year horizon is, like, obviously there's immediate climate impacts today and they're horrific already. I suppose at the moment, a lot of industries are still ignoring them though. And what I'm saying is I expect them to get to a point where they become impossible to ignore. And actually it completely transforms industries by disaster rather than by design. And we still have a period of time where we can start that transformation and try and enact some of it, getting ready for that. It's not to say there's immediate impacts now, but I see those as escalating and reaching a point of kind of no return, where we're forced to take things seriously. But yeah, broadly agree with everything else you said. Raki, would you like to come in next?
Thanks. Just sharing some experiences of trying to figure out, I mean, my role at ITF as Just Transition Organizer is just 2 months old, but and I come from the Indian trade union movement, and just trying to think these issues through. So I don't know the UK context that well in terms of also how the unions work. So I'm just relying on my own experience. I think partly when Ian, you were speaking about speaking to people in a geographical area, in a community, I think sometimes it helps for them to, there's impacts on us as workers, there's impact on us as community members, to separate the two and maybe to do a little bit of evidence-based discussion, maybe just a walk through the community before a conversation or a meeting to identify, things like, if disaster was to, what are the climate events that impact us? Are we prepared for these kinds of disasters? Who are the most vulnerable in our communities? Are we prepared to protect them? Something like that, for that to be the starting point, rather than a very general abstract discussion. There'll always be debates and discussions and controversies there. And similarly, Finley, I was just thinking, even for impact on workers, part of the reason for introducing a like a climate audit tool, really to build evidence-based sort of discussion and evidence-based policy, lobbying, campaign plans, anything of that sort, rather than to have a abstract discussion sometimes is useful. We can discuss different methodologies. And the reason I talked about adaptation and mitigation, because adaptation is something workers see directly in their workplace, in their lives. Mitigation is harder for them to sometimes understand. What do you mean by alternate fuels? What does that mean? That gets technical. We don't have the information on it. What will this policy really be about? Decarbonization of a sector, too huge even for me to understand, as a researcher come organizer. So I'm just wondering how we can break this down into both digestible tools and knowledge modules. I think that's, sorry, I've gone on for a while, but just trying to think through some methodologies and strategies that we can use.
Yeah. So one thing, just for context, I've discussed this with ITF before. Someone called Jeremy Anderson, because I read there was a report on decarbonising aviation, and one of the things it called for was just transition councils or just transition committees to be set up at every level. And this to me sounded kind of just like basically this idea with a different name. But when I discussed it a bit with Jeremy and someone else that he was working with, he sort of said, well, actually, we haven't worked out what that would actually look like and the mechanics of how it would work. And what I think we're trying to present here is some of the mechanics, which are quite flexible. Like, there's a general principle that I think is important to get good mix of participants. It's really important to have a well-rounded question and a design, and the design of the process is what you're saying. Like, looking at aviation, there's a whole load of different topics. It's the actual impact of the emissions. It's not just carbon. There's other greenhouse gases. There's contrails and stuff. Then there's like making our aircraft more efficient. There's electric. There's hydrogen aircraft. There's biofuels. Are they sustainable or are they not? Electrofuels. There's carbon capture. There's carbon offsetting. And all of these are quite complex and need their own area for discussion, just looking at that and nothing else. otherwise it becomes really confusing. So that's then the good design of the process, and also why you need to think maybe we don't bite off more than we chew by trying to figure out the strategy to decarbonize the whole of aviation at once. Maybe we just focus on what do we do with contrails, and that's just the focus for now, and ignore the rest. And or you say, well, actually, we need to deal with these things. And I think that's why the design of it's important, and it needs careful planning so that you kind of structure it in a way where people get things, they get time to discuss this, and they hear from those specialists, and then there's a break, and then and there's appropriate time for things so you don't overwhelm people. So all of that comes into the design of it, I think.
Great, thank you. I cannot see any other hands for the moment, so we're gonna sort of like move to the last part, which is what can we do next?
Shall I get that kind of bullet point list up again?
Pardon?
Is it useful for?
Oh yeah, did you have a bullet point list?
Yeah, it was just what we discussed earlier. It's the next slide. But just so you know, I changed the name here, so they're acronyms, right? But yeah, so get involved. So I think, well, I can go through these and let me know if there's additional things, Clara. But I think firstly, we need to reach out to high carbon sectors to have this discussion. We've got an invite to some national industrial sectors because of some of the work we've done, but we don't really have enough members in this group that work in sectors that are primarily in like energy and automotive and chemicals. And so really, we're really keen on people that have connections with people in those groups. It doesn't need to be someone in a leadership, high up rep position. It could just be people that work in that sector but are interested in this topic and would be interested in helping us get into that sector to have the discussion. I'm really keen to help actually train people to go and present this stuff to their sector and their colleagues, and go and run with it as well, and support them. So we can use our network to get contacts in those sectors, and then ultimately try and get invites to branch meetings, conferences, committee meetings, etc. And we have a Workers Assembly WhatsApp group for trying to organise this stuff. We've got a model motion, which I initially drafted a 2-page thing. We've got an alternative 1-page, which I shared in the chat earlier. We could have people to help review that and tell us if it's too complicated, if it gets across the key points, or if we need to change it. And then we also need to look at kind of strategically for this. If we want to get particular sectors to do this, maybe we need to take it to their appropriate industrial conference next year. So in that case, what's the timeline? Do we need to get a motion in by February in order to get to the conference in June, and what's that sort of thing, and start to lay out the timeline with people that know a bit about that. Those were my thoughts. Is there anything you'd add to that, Clara?
Thanks, Finlay. I guess that one thing is that if you've got any feedbacks on the presentation, on things that are unclear or could be improved, or we need to add sections to the presentation, feel free to send some feedbacks via email. I've put Finlay and my email in the chat. It's useful to have the WhatsApp group for the Workers Assembly. However, people cannot click on the presentation, so it may be useful to put it in the chat as well, Finlay.
Sorry, put what in the chat? I was just updating
the Workers Assembly WhatsApp group.
Oh yeah, I'll put that. So it's let me just copy that one and I'll put it in.
Okay.
There you go. It's in the chat now.
When it comes to the model motion, I think that yes, we're going to be looking at can we submit motions about Workers Assemblies in our sectoral conferences. At this stage, we've got no information yet on the timings of those conferences, but they should be happening in 2024. So if you've got any information or intelligence about the timescale please do get in touch, because there is often quite a long sort of period or a short deadline to submit motions, and we'd like to try to organize to progress those in as many sectors as we can. Yeah, you all are experienced trade unionists, and you may have or you will have contact in sectors like aerospace, automotive, energy, transport, construction, oil, and pharmaceutical in particular, because currently the Climate Justice Caucus is, a majority made by community branches, not-for-profit sector, health, local authorities, education, but we still really have got a top priority of reaching out to more sort of like workers in those particular industries. Finally, what else can you think about? Is there anything you need the caucus to do to help you to get more involved? So I'll just reopen up like the sort of contributions or questions for a few minutes before we conclude. Ian.
Well, just another abstract thought that may or may not mean anything. But have you come across, Finley, scenario planning? You sort of design things for consumers. So you can kind of do a little cartoon. You do a visual image graphic of what an effective worker assembly-led transition might mean. And you could do a little graphic, a cartoon of one that went horribly wrong, And maybe that it's a sort of immediate communication that workers can kind of grasp without having to worry about all the technical stuff.
Well, so I suppose, yeah, there's scenario planning that the industry does, but they tend to like leave out things. Often they leave out the necessary stuff they need to do. So yeah, I think that's kind of exactly what we're getting to, is we want workers to do their own scenario planning and think through actually what things might happen that our business leaders aren't including in their strategies, but we want to make sure is in there because we want there to be robust planning for our future and to not ignore. And then, yeah, making visuals is always a good way of articulating stuff. If you send me an email, I do have a couple that I've made to try and illustrate the cliff edge we're driving towards and that sort of thing. I'd be happy to share.
Because there's a bit of a history of this. Because I think I was involved in Kate's, and before I got involved, they used to do that to illustrate, industrial policy and what it actually means to real people. If it engages people,
Thank you. I don't know what Kate is, so if you've got a link in the chat, that'd be great. But I do like the idea of having something visual, even just to present the idea of Workers Assembly. And, if we were able to find some fonts to work with some illustrators to either do a little zine about it or, a little animation, I would love that. But yeah, there's a lot of work already. Richard.
Okay, I work with London Mining Network, and we've got I work on waste management and the disasters with that and risk. Within that, there's a recent studies by UK academics have shown there's about 20 million people live daily with the water impacts of mining. So when I say mining, it's about its impacts, social and environmental. What we're on our just transition work, we're looking at narratives, how we can talk about it, and with different groups, with unionists, with others, with I don't know. There's a thing about influencers, but we should all be influencers. And it's inspirational how possibly this can be, this can actually concretize influence, how to take it forward, although you've explained about reps and they've got to justify a concluded assembly. So about going away from that. But back to the thing about we do some educational work about what it's like living with a mine, and we study project an image of and going into schools and stuff, and project a situation where people live and their livelihoods and all their support mechanism, and then you take it away and you put the mine in and it's all lost. I'm not saying it, but it's about a way of talking about some of the materials that we take for granted or don't even think about, right? So coal, and then we hit, like, we did say we were thinking about lithium, and so we had a general scratch of the head, collective heads about lithium, because there's two types, and there's particular.
Thanks, Richard. Let's not go into a technical discussion about this right now.
I mean, just on the general thing about like the way that stuff's presented. For this workshop, I did sit on the advice that Involve, who are facilitating the workshop, gave to the speakers, and they did ask them not to give big PowerPoint presentations with lots of bullet points, kind of like the one I just gave to you there, because that does put off people. They kind of said the best ones tend to mostly just have big pictures, and you're mostly talking, and you can't be innovative in the way that you deliver things. And they even gave the example of someone using Lego to get one of their points across. To do with carbon budgets. So I think absolutely, that's all kind of up to the design of the workshop, and it can be done in lots of different ways to try and help people visualize and understand some things that are maybe new to them, which is good teaching, right? And it's kind of if you get good speakers in, then they should be able to do that.
Thank you. Okay.
Can I dare I say, during one of the recent Palestine demonstrations, I saw a woman walking along, drawing what she took from the key players, looking at it, and I looked over her shoulder. I thought, that is really interesting, just to. Anyway, on Clara's point about illustrators, thank you, Clara.
Thank you, Richard. I mean, beyond just the Workers Assemblies process, I think a lot of the comments show that education is really important, and that doesn't have to just happen in Workers Assemblies. Obviously, we'd like to see our union doing far more education around climate justice and different solutions. I've shared in the chat, it's like a bit of an education program that includes past sessions with the Caucus, but also from other groups and organizations. That feel free to use them if they are useful. And also, Unite does run an environmental rep course, but it's only about twice a year. I'm actually going on it in a couple of weeks' time to see, what the content. But I think this type of education should feature on every rep course, and across the board to really widen the number of people. It shouldn't be just a specialist area. It should really be across the board for all reps and also members. So that's something that, we hope to push inside Unite as well. I think we've come through the end of the session. I don't know, Finlay, if you had any concluded remark, but I'll let you the last word. But I just want to thank you so much for, your presentation and your dedication to progress with this idea of Workers Assembly, and, really glad we've got you on the Caucus and working with you to progress that. But I'll leave you the last words before we say goodbye to everybody.
Yeah, no, I just thanks everybody for listening to me for an hour on a Monday night. So I really appreciate it. I'm saving this presentation now. I'll put it on Google Drive. I'll send a link so we can share it on the Unite WhatsApp group. And I just really emphasize, we'll also share the WhatsApp group if you want to discuss this more and be part of the group that's taking this to branches or sectors or whoever you can think of to have this conversation. That'd be really appreciated. And that also goes to people that have joined from ITF as well. Really keen to talk to you guys in the future about this as well, more widely in other countries as well.